Hey everyone, it is I, Scarred Hero, and here I am with episode 1 of the weekly Yozakura podcast. And you may be thinking, episode 1, haven't I already seen this before? Perhaps, but I've decided to reboot the podcast because the way I'd been structuring it was I was going through each individual arc of Mission Yozakura Family and analyzing it and giving my ideas on like how I feel about that given arc. And after months of not uploading, I have come to the conclusion that that is a daunting task, and I'd rather just get my entire thoughts of the series done and over with episode 1. So this episode will be me discussing my feelings about Mission Yozakura Family as a whole, which will be, in my opinion, I think it might be pretty interesting. So thank you to any viewer who is, or not viewer, listener who is listening. I'll try to be as, I don't want to spend time on little details per se. I want to make sure this first episode runs smoothly and just my general thoughts on just everything about this series. So by the time episode 2 comes out, we can talk about the latest chapter as well as any news in regards to Mission Yozakura Family in general, from its sales numbers to just anything else that's going on that I feel that fans of Mission Yozakura Family should know about. So without further ado, let me discuss my opinions on the start of Mission Yozakura Family. Now, I was really hooked to the series from chapter 1. I remember seeing Taiyo Asano, the main character, and his struggles with his social anxiety. That kind of resonated with me in a way, so I was really drawn into the story because I saw a protagonist who I was like, yeah, I can relate to this guy. And it was a great feeling, especially when I first read it over 3 years ago. And it was just nice. Mission Yozakura Family was the series that got me into reading Jump every week. Before I read Mission Yozakura Family, I was buying My Hero Academia volumes as they came out. But once I read Mission Yozakura Family, I had this determination, or determination's a bit of a strong word, but I had this motivation, yes, to catch up with other series I liked in Jump, and so I could read everything every week. So Mission Yozakura Family was so good in my opinion that really kickstarted that for me. After Mission Yozakura Family, I made sure to catch up with My Hero Academia, Black Clover, Jujutsu Kaisen, and it's nice. And I started reading everything in the magazine after it came out too, so to this day I've read everything in Jump currently. There's a few series I've dropped, and I'm not completely caught up with One Piece and Hunter x Hunter, although I intend to. But yeah, so it's just great. I love Weekly Shonen Jump in general, but Mission Yozakura Family, its first chapter, its start was instrumental for me really getting into not only the series itself, but Weekly Shonen Jump as a whole. So again, I just really liked it. I thought the art was pretty good. It gave me similar vibes to stuff like Hitman Reborn, which I was really into at the time, as well as just other it was a really entertaining read. I just liked it. And obviously the end of the chapter with Taiyo swearing to protect Mutsumi, just chapter 1 is such an amazing start to this amazing series, and I'm glad to have been reading it every week since, because it's just a blast. And chapter 1 was perfect down to the last minute details to quote Homelander. But yeah, I loved chapter 1 so much. And then chapter 2, I love chapter 2 as well, because obviously if I go through all 162 chapters, we'll be here all day, but I thought chapter 2 in particular was if chapter 1 got me hooked into the characters and the story, chapter 2 got me hooked into the comedy of the series. Like, I remember because that chapter was about like the bomber assassin who was trying to get Mutsumi, and Taiyo had to, of course, protect her. And I remember the ending where Kyoichiro flings the bomb back at like this bomb assassin who is a social media addict, and he starts like tweeting and stuff as he's burning to death. And I don't know, that was like the funniest thing ever to me. Like, I remember falling to the floor laughing, which might sound a bit cringe or whatever, but I mean, I liked it, and I think that's the important thing. Yeah, I remember just really enjoying the start, reading it every week, and I know I said earlier that Mission Yozakura Family got me to read Jump every week, but it wasn't my first attempt at getting into Jump. Once Viz Media started doing their all chapters of Shonen Jump, like simu-published or whatever, I tried to start reading Jump once that happened. I think like Samurai 8 was the first series I tried to get into and read on a weekly basis, but I just fell off of it because like I liked it enough. Like, I didn't read stuff like Samurai 8 and Beast Children and think they were bad. In fact, in Beast Children's case, I thought it was pretty good, but it was just nothing there was nothing to make me want to read it every week. Like, I just end up like falling off the series, and then suddenly I realize, oh, I haven't read that in a few weeks, and realize that there's a backlog of chapters I haven't read. And obviously eventually both of those series got canceled. But Mission Yozakura Family really, it captured me from the start, which is just very important in a manga, especially in Jump these days. Having a great start is instrumental, and I think, in my opinion, Mission Yozakura Family does that well. So again, the start was great. I remember the end of volume 1 was like the flower bin delivery stuff. I recently reread it with like the English physicals coming out, and I really enjoyed that, because like, as much as I like the comedy and stuff, like seeing the action, seeing Taiyo like fight these people who are threatening Mutsumi and the family, it was just great. And that was kind of our first glimpse at that, was with the flower bin delivery stuff. We also see a bit of that Taiyo and Kyoichiro dynamic for the first time. Well, not the first time, but we start seeing more of it, and I really like it. Recently, they did like this popularity poll for the series where you vote for your favorite duo, and I voted Taiyo and Kyoichiro every time, just because I love their dynamic. It's just so entertaining to me, and how they're kind of like very similar but opposite characters. It's great. I'll get into that later though, probably. So the Hanawa stuff, flower bin delivery, was great stuff. I liked it. And we continue getting those individual chapters with like the family members for a while, and that's what I was rereading. Like, just yesterday I'm reading volume 2, and currently in the series, obviously it's grown into something that's like a much more grand story, and like there's a constant narrative, and it's just like it's a lot, but it's always focused on kind of like the main story. And now that we've kind of finished like the Momo stuff, I feel I kind of missed the earlier like one-off mission vibes, because that was just really interesting to me, like seeing the amount of kind of world building in volume 2. Like, we see all like, I think we see like more about the spy world at the beginning of the series, and currently we haven't really seen a lot of that, with the exception of like the gold rank spy stuff. I thought them introducing the gold ranks was really cool, but we don't get a lot of that these days as compared to earlier in the series, where we have like Taiyo doing these missions and then going to school the next day. Like, the first 2 volumes of the series definitely feel, or maybe I'd say the first 4, give or take, they have like a more school life setting to it, and I kind of miss that, which makes me excited, because in like literally the latest chapter, and the chapter preview for next chapter talks about how like the series is getting a color page to celebrate the return of basically slice of life chapters in the series, which is great. but I'll get into that again later. You see a bunch of different opinions about Mission Yozakura Family if you, I guess, look in the right places. And there are some who would say like the start of the series really isn't that good. And again, like stuff like that, it's totally subjective. I think it's great. Someone else could think it's the worst thing in existence. And that's just people's opinions at the end of the day. But I really like volume 1 and 2 from like a world building standpoint. I feel like it does a good job at introducing you to the characters and the world, and just sort of that, like, it's exposition, but in my opinion it's entertaining exposition. And I feel like a lot of shonen manga, at least from what I've read nowadays, don't really have that level of exposition, because with authors not wanting to get their series canceled, they try to get into like the meat of the series as soon as possible. Mission Yozakura Family didn't really do that. Like it was able to take its time, and I think part of it was like luck with all the things ending in Jump around the time it came out. It definitely got lucky and was able to have that exposition where most series in Jump recently haven't been able to do that. But that's why it kind of gives off like a 2000s feel, in my opinion. Like it'll get compared to stuff like Hitman Reborn and Gintama, and that's because like those series, Mission Yozakura Family has that level of exposition and almost like a slow start, but in a good way, in my opinion. It has that slow start that's just reminiscent of series 20 years ago or a decade ago, 15 years ago. Yeah, that sounds right. But just I really liked it. And then we get into volume 3. Volume 3 begins to get into the meat of the series I was just talking about earlier. We've seen like fights and stuff within the first 2 volumes. Obviously we have the fight Taiyo versus Hanawa, then we get Taiyo versus Hatoda. But in volume 3 we get the Kuroyuri arc, which was just phenomenal in my opinion. That arc starts with chapter 19 and it just blew my mind. I loved it so much because we get like our first like spread of the series at the end of that chapter too, where Sui like cuts Taiyo, and I was just like dumbfounded because like at the start of the series I was invested into the characters and the comedy, and it was great. I was just enjoying it from like volume 1 and volume 2, but volume 3, with me, like how much I like love the fights, I was kind of craving that a bit, because I know I just talked about like the exposition or whatever, but I really wanted to see some fights. And I think the Kuroyuri arc definitely began to introduce those really cool fight scenes that I wanted to see. So with Sui of the Hinagiku showing up and like beating Taiyo, and then Naneo having to save Taiyo's butt, and just like that whole stretch of chapters, it's from like chapter 19 to 26, we get that whole development of Kuro. It's just fabulous. And like Kuroyuri's backstory too is just amazing, because okay, I'll always stand by the opinion that Kuroyuri is an underrated villain because he did a great job. He did a great thing for the story. He's a character that has parallels to Taiyo, and with both of them losing their family. And like with Taiyo, he lost his family and now he's trying to protect the Yozakura family. That's his way of like coming to terms with his grief, I guess, while Kuroyuri's a more like obviously a villainous approach. He's going out and killing those who he blames for his daughter's death. And it was just a really interesting stretch of chapters. 10 out of 10 arc, and it was amazing. I remember like reading the chapter for the first time where Kuroyuri reveals his backstory, and like I remember that page vividly where he's like, I'm not going to preach about right or wrong. I just needed to show them what it means to like what it means to make me your enemy. I think that's exactly what he says. And that line just hit so hard. I just loved that arc. And then from there, Kuroyuri is of course assassinated, which in his dying moments he gives Taiyo this marble that holds the secrets to his family, which leads him to finding out about the existence of Tanpopo, an organization that is not only behind his family's death, but is supposedly behind the death of the Yozakura family's parents. And from there, we get like volumes 4 and 5 are another stretch of kind of like just, if I had to describe it, it's almost like mystery chapters. We get a lot of slice of life stuff, but we slowly like build the mystery of what's up with Tanpopo, and I was compelled by that mystery. I'd argue that those 2 volumes are probably like the slowest part of the series. It had like a few like gems in there. Like I know we got the Sosuke stuff. I love Sosuke, which might be, I have a feeling opinions on Sosuke are like kind of mixed, because yes, he's a scumbag, but he's a hilarious scumbag. And I don't know, like every chapter he's in my opinion, is just hilarious. And that happens during like volume 5. So after the Kuroyuri arc, we do get a stretch of chapters that is again kind of slow, but I do think there's some gems and definitely some value to it. Again, just great stuff. And before I move on, I think it's also important for me to share my opinions on the individual characters. I can't remember okay, I take that back. I do remember exactly who my favorite character was at this time. It was definitely Sui, because the way he kind of came in chapter 19 and introduced the Kuroyuri arc, I just like, even to this day, while Sui isn't currently my favorite character, I still think he's like great. Even though like we don't really know too much about him, I just feel like his whole vibe is just really cool. I like characters like him, kind of like the cool swordsman types or whatever, and that's just like a trope that I'm really into, so I liked him a lot, especially at this time. I considered him my favorite character. As for the rest of them, Taiyo obviously I really liked. He was the one who really gripped me into the story from chapter 1, so there's no way, like Taiyo's just great. Kyoichiro. I liked Kyoichiro back then, but I think similar to a way that I liked Sosuke, as in like this guy's kind of crappy, but he's entertaining, and he had a bit of some like charm and charisma to him that I really liked too. So I liked Kyoichiro a lot. He was probably one of my favorite family members at the time. We also have Futaba. I like Futaba. I like it. The entire family, like the entire Yozakura family is really good. I think the only ones I was kind of like on, like even though I still really liked them, was like Futaba and Nanio and Kengo. I think everyone else I liked like a lot, but Futaba and Nanio and Kengo I liked enough, but I wouldn't put them in the same tier as like Kyoichiro or Shinzo, especially at that time. So moving on to the Mansion Raid arc, or I don't know how it's like labeled on like the Yozakura wiki or whatever. I think it's like the Tanpopo invasion arc, yes. I love that arc. I think everyone loves that arc, because starting from like chapter 40 is where the story of the series starts to really explode. It all starts out with like Taiyo going to this like jail and infiltrating it or whatever to get some details on Tanpopo or whatever. He does that, and then he does like another mission where he infiltrates a hotel that Kawashita is supposed to be at, and we get that whole thing with like Shinzo coming to save the day, and those chapters were really cool, like very action packed, had just the right amount of comedy. And It was just really good stuff. And from there we get like right after that, the Tampopo sends like an army to raid the Yozakura family's home, their mansion, and it's just insane. Like that arc, we get Tayo's first half blooming, which is probably the biggest thing there. Well, that's debatable. It'd be between that and the introduction of Momo Yozakura, the father of the Yozakura family, who's still alive. And he has like this whole fight with Kyoichiro, and Kyoichiro's like, okay, I'll get into that. Let me talk about Tayo's awakening first, because so at the hotel, like Tayo was basically knocked out by Momo, who we didn't know was Momo at the time, but Tayo was knocked out, put out of commission. He's basically on life support, and once the Tampopo army raids the mansion, they shut off the power, so Tayo's life is in critical danger. So Mutsumi performs a blood transfusion to keep him alive, knowing that if she gives him his blood, Tayo will have Yozakura blood in him and therefore have access to actual Yozakura power. And that's when like the main person leading the army, I forget his name or whatever, but he comes into the room where Tayo's at, and he's about to kidnap Mutsumi, and then Tayo just like throws a knife at his hand, and he's like, "Don't you lay a finger on Mutsumi." And it was great. Iconic page where we see Tayo's first awakening. Obviously at that time he was only half awakened, but it was still really cool. We didn't know that there was a full awakening. It was just a power-up regardless in a shonen manga that has been mostly comedy up to this point, to be honest. It was just, the hype levels were insane. So I remember really enjoying that, and then like the choreography of the fight with that guy too, like just the way Tayo moved and the way it was paneled, I just remember it being so fantastic. But I don't have any of like the chapters open in front of me right now. I'm just going off of what I remember in my head. So the fact that I can vividly remember this and like talk about it in detail really goes to show how phenomenal it really is. So we get Tayo's whole fight with that guy, and it's great stuff. We see Goliath do some stuff too, like attacking the workers with like his giant dog form. It was great. And just like everyone else kind of just attacking the army. But Kyoichiro goes off to and encounters Momo, and this is where Kyoichiro starts to become my favorite character in the series. And to this day, right now, currently, I shouldn't say to this day, that implies that he was before, but currently, Kyoichiro Yozakura is my favorite character in the entirety of manga as a medium. I love Kyoichiro so much. He's such a great character. And this arc is kind of where he like becomes my favorite character in the series, just because like the way he kind of like takes responsibility and like goes after Momo and tells him like, it isn't your place to be here, and demands that he leaves not only Mutsumi but Tayo alone as well. Like he's like, stay away from those two when Kyoichiro attacks Momo with Calm Storm. It was just so great. That arc was just fantastic. Like the other arcs of Mission Yozakura Family, most of them at least, it was like very short, but it was still just a phenomenal read, and I loved it. Then we get like the Hot Springs chapters or whatever winding down. I think, so obviously Mission Yozakura Family has its anime coming out in 2024, being adapted by Silver Link. And if the anime has 2 cores, and I'm hoping it does, especially with it being in 2024, I bet Silver Link is cooking up something good. But 2 cores, my guess are Season 1 would end after the 2 Hot Springs chapters that we get after the mansion raid, to kind of like cool things down. And then at the end of those chapters, like, we see Tayo tell Mutsumi, like, I'm gonna go see your father, and we're gonna work things out together as a family. And it was just really good stuff. And then, to the surprise of many readers at the time, we don't go into slice of life stuff after that. We go immediately into Taiyo going after Momo, and he's on like the train. The Locomotive Gerbia, I believe is what, yeah, Locomotive Gerbia is what it was called. And man, that arc was so good. It was like peak fiction, peak Mission Yozakura Family content right here in this arc. Just, it was so short yet so beautiful, just everything about it. We see like the introduction of like more spreads in the series with that arc, like even like minor things like Taiyo doing like this like attack where he shoots off Hiei into different directions. Like, I think beginning from that arc, the art sees like a massive jump in quality, and it like the art wasn't even bad before. The art before was pretty good. It was charming, but from the Locomotive Gerbia arc onwards, the art is just like breathtaking. And obviously we see like Taiyo encounter Kawashita and Momo. They end up escaping, and instead Taiyo has to fight this girl, Yuki Shirai, who claims that she's the one who murdered his parents, which is already insane. And so we see that whole backstory and how that she is known as White Snake in Tampopo, and she's a human experiment. And basically, Tampopo used Taiyo's parents to get to her and use her as an experiment. So she didn't really kill the Asano family, she just blames herself for it, because if they weren't involved with her, Tampopo wouldn't have had any reason to kill the Asanos. But it was just really interesting, like the drama, the backstory, like the dialogue, everything about that arc was just absolute beauty. And we see Taiyo use second Yai too, where he transforms his electric gun into a sword, which is the coolest thing ever. And like the fight between Taiyo and White Snake, it was just phenomenal. We also see Taiyo use like his I consider it his like trademark move, Amaterasu, and it's just great stuff. I loved that arc, and it's just, like, thinking back, I know this is a podcast, so I kind of have to talk about it, but it almost leaves me like speechless. It's just so good. And we leave that arc with Taiyo knowing a little more. We also are introduced to Ai and man, I forget the other Tampopo guy with the glasses. I forget his name. Member of the Nijibana, the one with poison. I'm sure you guys know who I'm talking about by now, but him, he's introduced, and it's just like great stuff. And then we see Futaba and Rin comes back, which is exciting. Seeing like the comeback of characters from the Kuroyuri arc excited me. Tampopo, I was like, yes, not Tampopo, Hinagitsu, yes, get them involved. I was just so excited. And we go from there immediately into planning for the big operation Yozakura Frontlines, which is the biggest arc in the series, the longest one so far, where obviously they get not only the Yozakura family plus Keiko and Ban, we also get the Tampopo involved, Toda's involved, Sosuke's involved, although they didn't really do much. Probably my biggest complaint with Mission Yozakura Family, to be honest, is the lack of usage of side characters. I think the side characters definitely could be used more. That's also why kind of reading volumes 1 and 2 make me miss the minor school characters. They weren't important, but they were kind of cool. I liked them. And the series is very focused on the core family. You already have its core cast is already bigger than most, so I understand why why they need to focus on them, but it would be nice to see more focus on the Hinagitsu and stuff. But anyways, they get the whole squad together and they're going to raid Skeleton Island because that's where they've discovered that Tampopo's base is. So it's basically this massive plan to take out Kawashita and Tampopo once and for all. And that arc has like a lot of good stuff. The art is amazing. Just before the arc even like gets underway, we see Bond train with Tayo, so Tayo gets his full awakening, or his full blooming instead of his half one, where Tayo awakens his blooming ability Harden. So we get more depth of that power system, which I find to be brilliant. I love blooming, and I'll explain here in a minute why I do. But we see every family member's blooming. We see Futaba's, Shinzo, Shion, Kingo, and Nanio. We don't see Kyoichiro's in that arc, but we do see everyone else's and like their fights with each of like the Nijibana, like that group of Tampopo members, and it's just great stuff. Each fight was entertaining. I loved seeing the siblings use their like abilities that like they were showing for the first time in these fights, and it was just really cool. And they kind of handled them like with ease. Like none of the family members really struggled against the Nijibana. They kind of just like once they pulled out the blooming, it was like their trump card, and they won pretty easily, which sounds like a negative when you're talking about like fights. Obviously you don't want your characters to win easily. That makes for a fight that is very entertaining, but these fights were very entertaining, from the awakenings of the blooming and just the way they went down, also seeing like the backstories and stuff of each Nijibana member. It was just really good stuff. And Kawashita too. Kawashita as a villain was really cool because he's this seemingly friendly dude, but he's also very scary at the same time. But I really like Kawashita. He was cool. Obviously, like one by one, we see the Yozakura family take down the Nijibana, and then Tayo and Kyoichiro go up to confront Kawashita, and that's when like we get this whole fight between like Tayo versus Kawashita, and just so much great stuff. Like the way we see Tayo in fights, like think about Mutsumi and like his purpose and what he wants, what he's fighting for. It's all just very good. I love every chapter of it. And I don't know, it's just like, again, great stuff. Seeing just everything in this arc was just so good. From the involvement of the side characters, to the family doing even more, to Tayo's character. He's someone who lost his family and has a new one now that he's working hard to protect, because he doesn't want to lose them the same way he lost his family. Now he's confronting the man who's responsible not only for his parents and younger siblings' death, but is also threatening his new family. So seeing Tayo kind of rise to the occasion to defeat the man who took everything from him, it's just really good, and just like peak battle shonen entertainment. It's absolutely phenomenal. And then by the end, we kind of see like Kawashita, he has his own blooming, and he ends up taking Tayo out, but Tayo, he gets back up, and once Kawashita kind of pulls like his trump card, like he's about to win, we see the rest of the family show up, and it's the Yozakura siblings and Tayo versus Kawashita, and it was just absolutely amazing. That fight, chapter 83, I remember just reading it, and like I had the Da 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 Dai Sakusan theme song that they made for like a promotional video. I had that playing in my headphones while I was reading chapter 83, just because I knew how big of a chapter that was. And man, like if I recall, that is the first chapter we get Mission Yozakura Family got its first cover of the magazine since chapter 1 in chapter 83, so I was so hyped for that chapter. I knew it was going to be huge. It was an extended chapter 2, like it got extra pages. It was getting the big treatment from Jump, which we really like to see and we kind of wish we'd see more of. But it was nice, and I just remember that chapter was phenomenal. That fight, just the way all the siblings used their abilities together, and they all went well with each other, and they all strategized well. And it was spy stuff, but it was like super powered spy stuff, which really is what Mission Yozakura Family is. Like super powered spies. It was just absolutely phenomenal. And we get that fight. Tayo ends up saving, I totally forgot to mention about Rei's corpse that Kyoichiro assigns. Like, he tells Tayo, like, this is a secret mission between you and I. You are going to get our mother's dead body from this evil man. And Tayo's like, yeah, sure. But he ends up getting the body, and the family ends up winning the fight, and this is going to become my new catchphrase for the podcast, I think, but absolutely phenomenal. That's 2 words that I can use to describe this series in general. It's just absolutely phenomenal. And that's pretty much the Yozakura Frontlines arc. Woo. And from there, our next arc, so after Frontlines, that kind of ends like the Tampopo saga. And from there, we immediately get into what we like to call the Momo saga, where Momo escapes at the end of the Frontlines arc, and from chapter 88 through the current chapter, like the latest chapter, have all been in what's considered the Momo saga, because the focus is taking out Momo. Although it doesn't seem that way at first, because in chapter 88, we learned that with like Tayo, he got some of Tsubomi's blood from Kawashita in his body, Tsubomi being the first head of the family. I totally forgot to mention that plot line with Kawashita, but the Tsubomi stuff, it's complicated. But Tayo has Tsubomi's blood now, and Tsubomi wants Tayo to kill her. And you know what I'm realizing? I'm doing pretty much the same thing I did before my reboot. I'm summarizing. Well, am I? So I'm kind of having like a existential thing here in a sense. Like, I don't want to take time to describe the events of the series, because obviously this podcast is intended for people who have already read it and are up to date. But I mean, to go over my thoughts for the series, I kind of do need to go over everything, so it's kind of a dilemma I'm having. But I really enjoyed the Tampopo saga. It's the bottom line, and the Momo saga gets off to a weird start, because we kind of have we're under the impression that Tsubomi's the villain. We even see the revival of like the heads and how Tsubomi's in command, so everyone's out here thinking, oh, Tsubomi's the next antagonist. And then Kyoichiro disappears in a phenomenal arc, fittingly called the Kyoichiro disappearance arc, where at that point Kyoichiro is definitely my favorite character by then. So like an arc focused on Kyoichiro, you bet I was excited. But like, he disappeared, he left, he went out on his own to take care of Momo and the revived heads of the family, and that's what he did. Momo once again escaped, but Kyoichiro took out all of the heads, and as a result, Momo weakened Tsubomi too, so the people we thought were going to be the antagonists for a while, they were quickly taken out, and it almost felt anticlimactic. Definitely some people felt that it was anticlimactic. I feel it was needed, because just like the way the Momo saga has, it's paced in a very weird way. Like, there's lots of twists and turns, so you think you're going somewhere, but you end up going other places, and I understand how it can confuse readers. I really enjoyed it, but there is something about this arc that kind of felt just a bit different in a sense. But we get the Kyoichiro disappearance arc, which was absolutely phenomenal because it really characterizes Kyoichiro. I think Kyoichiro disappearance arc up there with the if the White Snake arc or the Locomotive Gerbia, whatever you want to call it, was important to characterize Taiyo and his ambition, the Kyoichiro disappearance arc did the same thing but for Kyoichiro. And I really liked how leading up to that arc, we were getting much more Kyoichiro focused too. Like chapter 99 was like mini Kyoichiro, where we see Kyoichiro turned into like a 5-year-old, and it's a really cute chapter where Kyoichiro kind of reveals how he's always felt about how things would turn out, and we see Taiyo comfort mini Kyoichiro, and he's like, you won't become the person you think you will, you're trustworthy and everyone relies on you, and basically reassures a 5-year-old Kyoichiro that in the future he'll still be a good person. And I thought that chapter was so beautiful. I didn't care for the baby Taiyo chapter, to be honest. I thought it was kind of useless, and I didn't find it as cute as other people did or as funny, but again, subjective. But I loved mini Kyoichiro, and because it did a really good job at kind of like characterizing Kyoichiro, which I wanted to see more of. And leading up to the Kyoichiro's disappearance, we do get more Kyoichiro characterization and pathos, which makes him disappearing hit like so much harder, and like why he disappeared. Like in the Kyoichiro disappearance arc, I feel like any complaints about Kyoichiro's character were kind of wiped away in the arc, because obviously from chapter 1, Kyoichiro was introduced as like a very creepy person, even like the antagonist of chapter 1, and he's easy to hate. Even in like the world of the series itself, like it's joked about how hated he is and how he's trash and scum and a loser. But in this arc, we see quite plainly just like why he is the way he is, and even though it's been like told to us repeatedly throughout the series why, in the Kyoichiro disappearance arc, instead of being told why, we really feel why. We go through Kyoichiro's thoughts and emotions, and how he feels the pressure as like the oldest sibling to just protect not only Mutsumi but everyone in general. Like he bears all this weight himself, and that's kind of his biggest character flaw. He feels the need to take everything into his own hands and isn't very good at accepting help from others. That's why, I mean, Taiyo was kind of the same way. He started out as like this very socially anxious kid who was scared of losing anyone and only talked to Mutsumi, but through opening himself up to the Yozakura family, he was able to get stronger and rely on others to, like, they helped him become stronger. It wasn't like he was dependent on these people, but they all work together and they all become stronger together, which is just a phenomenal thematic concept. And Kyoichiro, and through this arc, he kind of goes through like a similar journey. Like he's very similar to Taiyo in the sense of like he has an unhealthy coping mechanism. Now, okay, because I just used those two words, let me backtrack to how I feel about the blooming power system, because I believe this is important if we're discussing the thematic beauty of Mission Yozakura Family. I believe the primary theme of Mission Yozakura Family is the acceptance of tragedy and finding the strength to move forward. The Yozakura family and Taiyo have all suffered heavy losses throughout their life. Taiyo's being his family, the Yozakura family's being their parents, and they all kind of cope with this trauma in a different way. With Taiyo, we see him become closed off, a shell. And when you think about it, Taiyo's blooming ability, Harden, he becomes like a shield, a shell, if you will, that protects Mutsumi. And if you look at the rest of the family's bloomings, they all kind of follow that pattern where it's the personality of the character and how exactly they cope with the painful realities of the story events. So like the Yozakura family's big thing is like the loss of their parents. So for example, Futaba, who's the first person we see bloom in the Frontlines arc with the exception of Bon and Tayo, but Futaba's ability is magnanimity. I think that's what it's called. Yeah, magnanimity, where she basically nullifies attacks. And when she awakens this blooming, we kind of see a flashback from Futaba from the day that Mutsumi and Rei were kidnapped. And Futaba kind of goes into this monologue, talking to Akai, saying, you soothe your heartache with rage. Meanwhile, I've basically saying she's accepted her heartache for the sake of the family. And that kind of ties in with her blooming, because when you nullify an attack, you're basically, like, you're facing it head on, but you're accepting it. You're just dispelling it. It's gone. And that's kind of how Futaba acts in terms of, like, the hardships of the family. She accepts them for what they are, but she doesn't let it hold her down. And I think that's very beautiful. So that's kind of where her blooming ability comes in. I think another really cool blooming ability is Kinko's. His is like, I forget the exact name of it. I think it's empathy, where he's able to empathize with his opponent by touching them or whatever, and like he can see their thoughts, and he uses this to get a feel for his opponent and kind of like fight them almost in a psychological sense. But the way he goes about it is he's usually very helpful. He doesn't want to like harm their psychological state. He wants to really understand his opponent. And that's kind of, after he awakens his blooming, we kind of see that side of Kinko more, where you realize as much as like a goofball he's a goofball for the sake of the family and their happiness. He wants to be this uplifting, positive guy in this family of the mostly serious spy people, and that's kind of his thing. He wants to empathize with his family members so he can like cheer them up with like jokes or whatnot and just being a goofball. And with his blooming ability, his empathy, he's kind of able to do that with his opponents, where he's like, I understand you, I don't really want to fight you, so let's end it. And that's what he does with his fight against like the Ice Kid. I forget his name, but he's not really much of a fighter. He just wants to understand others and help them out, which is very wholesome, and that's why I really like Kinko. He was kind of at the bottom end of my favorites in the Yozakura family for a while, but I think it was after the Yozakura egg bath chapter where it's like he gets a pimple and he gets all self-conscious about it, and like he has this talk with Futaba too where he's like crying and kind of like breaks down over the fact that he wasn't able to cheer the family up or whatever, and the stress of everything that's going on kind of got to him, which gave him the pimple. After that chapter, Kinko really rose up in my list of favorite Yozakura characters, just because of how deep his character really is. It's very surprising. So the bloomings, they represent thematically almost coping mechanisms, and how these characters use their personalities and their inner strengths and their anxieties to overcome struggles and in a battle shonen way, like just win the day or whatever. So again, I think the blooming power system's like just great. I love it. And back to the Kyoichiro disappearance arc, Kyoichiro's personality is he's someone who kind of shoulders the burdens of like the entire family and wants to take care of everything himself. And that's kind of the way he copes, is he wants he wants everyone to be happy, so he takes on the hardships alone, which is a very unhealthy way of thinking. But that's exactly what he does in the Keiichiro disappearance arc. Is similar to Kingo. He was stressed about the situation with the heads of the family being revived, so he just goes out to take care of it himself. And in the process, he does win against the heads, but he ends up like getting himself poisoned. And from there, he like once the family catches up to him and finds him, he just like Keiichiro disappears in the thin air, and then he's found again, and the family has to fight him and bring him back. And like chapters 124, 125, and 126, where the families, or no, I should say 125 and 126, where the family's fighting Keiichiro, we really see Keiichiro's like mental state kind of just like where it's at. Like he's scared, he's not in his right mind, he's not thinking straight, he's too focused on protecting the family that he's kind of just like forgot all about himself and just like being very irrational and taking all the burden on himself when he could just seek the support of his family members. And eventually we see like Taiyo get through the Keiichiro in like a phenomenal series of chapters. It was so amazing. But we see Taiyo get through the Keiichiro, and Keiichiro kind of realizes like, yeah, I was being an idiot. Whatever this problem is, we can work it out together as a family, which was great. And that's when Momo comes back. And from there we get like, it's all versus Momo. Like Momo is up to no good, he's causing mischief, and the family has to stop him before he unleashes his plan of basically killing innocents for the sake of reviving the Yozakura's mom, Rei. He's reviving her so they can all live a happy life together. That's what he wants. He wants a happy life with his kids, but in the process is killing innocent people, so you know he kind of has to be stopped. And that's where we get into something really interesting with Momo, because again, Keiichiro, his flaw is that he wouldn't accept the help from others, and he carries the burden of problems by himself because he feels it's his duty as like the oldest sibling or whatever, and that's what he does. And in the climactic battle against Momo, I know I'm kind of jumping way ahead here, but Keiichiro tells Momo, it's like, you're just like me, because man, Momo's such a tragic character, because his entire dilemma could have been avoided if he opened up to the family. Like, we find out that Rei and Momo, like, their plan was to draw out the true enemy of the Yozakura family, and in the process, Rei sacrificed her life, and Momo basically sacrificed his insanity. Like, he went insane over the guilt of being involved in the death of the love of his life, and wouldn't go back to the family. Like, if you went back to the Yozakura family and explained the situation to them, I'm sure they would have welcomed him with open arms. But instead, Momo like fled and tried to do everything himself in like a mastermind way, where he drove himself mad with guilt and regret and just ended up doing stupid things, all because he wouldn't open up to others. Just like Taiyo, just like Keiichiro, Mission Yozakura Family is clearly trying to convey to the reader that in order to live a happy life, you need to be open to others and not become dependent on them, but to allow them to help you grow as a person. And Momo refused to do that, and that's what ended up turning him into a massive villain that ended up having to be killed. So yeah, that's Momo. And obviously after the Keiichiro disappearance arc, we get a few more arcs with like Momo conflicts and stuff, and like tensions rising. We see the introduction of gold rank spies, as I mentioned earlier, and Shinso and Futaba get brainwashed, which leads to the mission to sibling retrieval, where they find Momo's hideout. He's on this boat. They're fighting brainwash Shinzo and Futaba. They try to bring them back, and eventually Momo ends up brainwashing the entire family with the exception of Taiyo and Kyoichiro. Taiyo fights Momo. Momo ends up winning, almost winning. Then Kyoichiro shows up to save the day and use his blooming ability to defeat Momo. And Kyoichiro's blooming ability, I think, is the best thematically, which is fitting. His ability is Void. He basically disintegrates everything into nothingness, and it's an overpowered move. Like, it just expands endlessly and disintegrates everything. And I think it goes so well with Kyoichiro, because when I was thinking about it before his blooming was revealed, how if Taiyo has hardening and is basically like the shield of the family, it makes sense if Kyoichiro was the sword of the family. And he kind of uses this analogy in the Kyoichiro disappearance arc, where he has the flashback about Mutsumi and talks about how he just needs to be a blade for her. That made me think, it's like, oh yeah, I was on the right track with my thinking. He's definitely going to have some sort of a blooming ability that ends up like amplifying his power and making Steel Spider become sharper. And that's pretty much what it is. He uses his summoning blood, it covers Steel Spider, makes it sharper, more dangerous, and it just disintegrates everything. But what makes it better than I hope is the fact that it disintegrate everything. Like, Kyoichiro was afraid to use it around the family because he didn't want to hurt them. He ended up using the Arakune or whatever to shield the family from the effects of his blooming. But Kyoichiro's blooming Void, it leaves everything disintegrated. He says, quote, "Nothing is spared, nothing remains." And I think that's a step beyond what I expected with like the blade ability blooming, is because yes, he does cut everything up, like his attacks are amplified, he becomes stronger, but what makes it unique is the fact that he can't really control it. It just spreads infinitely, which really fits Kyoichiro, because Kyoichiro to the Yozakura family is kind of this like uncontrollable, powerful force of rage that just destroys everything in its path for the sake of protecting Mutsumi and the family. So his blooming kind of representing that by being this uncontrollable wave of destruction is just beautiful, because with this move, Kyoichiro, he leaves a void. Nothing is left. He just destroys everything. And I know I'm repeating myself, but really hammer that into your minds, just how perfectly that fits Kyoichiro and like his coping mechanism. In chapter 1, he sought to kill Taiyo because he thought Mutsumi's life was in danger because of him. He doesn't really think, he just wants to destroy everything and anything that puts Mutsumi and the family in danger. And that's what his blooming does. It's overpowered, but it's also kind of tragic at the same time, just how uncontrollable it is. Because Kyoichiro himself can't really control his urge to just purge everything to protect everyone. Even with, as I mentioned, the mini Kyoichiro chapter, we see a 5-year-old Kyoichiro terrified of himself as he got older, because he already feels like he's going to be this scary person who just ruins the family. And that's not who he becomes, but it is still very sad that that's just kind of who he is. He fights for the sake of others, but he does it in a way where he's just like this uncontrollable monster. And that's what his ability Void is. I just think that's beautiful. And that's pretty much where we are with the series now. We obviously, after Momo is about to be defeated, he has this whole plan. Then the big bad, the true enemy shows up, Asa. We don't know who he is, but he's just this creepily drawn guy who's after the Yozakura. Like, claims he wants to protect them, but as we know, Momo also wanted to protect the family too. And it seems like every Mission Yozakura family is really trying to drive in on this theme of people who do what they think is best, but don't really they don't really consider others, or they don't really let them in. That's kind of who every villain is in the series so far. They're selfish people, or maybe not. They're either selfish or just unable to open up. They have this problem. They're basically very antisocial. They have problems with interacting with people, which, I mean, Tayo too, the main character, that was his whole dilemma at the start of the series. So everything really fits. So I'm really intrigued about Asa and what there is in store for the series. I'm thinking that Asa might be the final villain of the series, kind of. I know we also have like the Tsubomi conflict to deal with, because I doubt she's permanently gone. So there's still a lot of stuff to cover, but I do feel like we've had the Tampopo saga, the Momo saga, and I feel like we're entering the Asa saga, which I have a feeling might be the final saga of the series. But I also think if it is, it'll definitely be like the longest one. Each saga has kind of lasted 10 volumes. I could see this whole stuff with like Asta, or I said Asta, not Black Clover, Mission Yozakura Family. Asa being the antagonist, I feel like that can stretch like 15 volumes and be perfect. So that's my thoughts on Mission Yozakura Family. I look forward to discussing each new chapter every week from now on, and I'd like to thank you all for listening. And with that said, I'll see you later.